The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NBA Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in the NBA from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NBA Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NBA.
Why Malcolm Brogdon is perhaps the final piece.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast.
For people who don't know or have not been watching the last few years, this has been a personal pet project of mine, right? I have probably done about 10 episodes over the last 3 years talking about Malcolm Brogdon trades, talking about what Malcolm Brogdon could potentially bring to the Knicks, talking about how good of a fit I thought he would be next to Jalen Brunson, and for various reasons, it just wasn't the right time. The Knicks didn't have the assets to get it done. He maybe wanted a different role than what the Knicks could offer, and it felt like it was going to be a case, at least in my deluded mind, of two star-crossed lovers who never came together. Well, on Friday, that changed as the Knicks signed Malcolm Brogdon to a 1-year non-guaranteed veteran minimum contract. For now, Malcolm Brogdon does not have a guaranteed spot on the roster, and yet it does sort of feel like he's going to end up on the roster. So on today's show, we're going to talk about what he would potentially bring to the Knicks if a trade is inevitable to open up the room necessary to keep both him and Landry Shamet, or potentially Garrison Matthews, right? You're only going to be able to, unless you have multiple trades of the young talent on the Knicks roster, you're only going to be able to keep two of those guys. But we'll talk about scenarios where they could potentially keep three as well. And then I thought I would quickly give you guys an updated rotation. I want to basically touch on a bunch of different topics that we will dive into even more in depth over the course of this week. But I wanted to start off with my big picture thoughts on what Malcolm Brogdon brings to the team. First of all, I think this is an acknowledgement, right? Because the premise, like just to skip ahead a little bit, is that the Knicks are probably going to trade one of Malcom Brogdon or Tyler Kolek, unless there is a bigger trade of someone like Deuce McBride or maybe even Mitchell Robinson looming that none of us anticipate. But for now, we think the Knicks are possibly going to trade a little bit of their future for their present. And I think the reason you do that is because you believe you're in the middle of a championship window. And this is something Alex and I talked about a whole lot last season, right? You don't know how things are going to go, but on paper, this looks like your best chance, right? Tyrese Halliburton out for the year. The Indiana Pacers that were, frankly, even if they didn't profile as one from a pure talent perspective, the way they play as a team, the way Halliburton runs that offense, they are a juggernaut. The Boston Celtics, as much as we want to clown them, and as much as the Knicks have every right to clown them after beating them in the playoffs in 6 games, some of those games in embarrassing fashion, the Boston Celtics were a juggernaut. Jason Tatum's out for the year, right? The Celtics are not a factor in the championship conversation. The Pacers are not a factor in the championship conversation. In turn, the next competition is a Cleveland team that has never gotten out of the second round, that seems to always get in their own way. And maybe last year was just injuries, and maybe they really are a step above the Knicks. Again, I think the Knicks are going to be better this year. I think they're going to be closer to what Cleveland's level was during the regular season. But you have a Cleveland team that just hasn't done it, hasn't proven anything yet, and that the Knicks, at least in a playoff context with Mitchell Robinson in the roster, theoretically match up somewhat well with. You have an Orlando team that's never gotten out of the first round, that hasn't won a playoff series together, that is really talented, but is led by a 23-year-old and a 22-year-old, extremely talented young players that I think are very capable of beating the Knicks in a series. They haven't proven anything. You have a Pistons team that you've already beaten. You have a Hawks team that I think at the end of the day, we'll talk about it with Brad Rowland of Locked On Hawks sometime this week or next. I don't think has the top end talent to beat the Knicks or to win a championship. I think they're going to be quite good. You have the Bucks, and it's basically just Giannis and the Giannisettes, right? They do not have a complete roster. They do not have a championship level roster. The West is loaded. No one is arguing that the door is wide open, because I would say the Oklahoma City Thunder are the best team since the Kevin Durant Golden State Warriors, right? And that is a major, major impediment in terms of the Knicks winning a championship. But you get to the finals, you have a chance. We saw it with the Knicks against the Celtics, right? I thought the Celtics last year were the best team since the Kevin Durant Warriors. And you know what? Like, the Knicks were close enough that with some variance in shooting, and ultimately with the Jason Tatum injury, though the Knicks were on track to be up 3-1 in that series even before Jason Tatum got hurt, the Knicks were going to beat the Boston Celtics, and the Knicks did beat the Boston Celtics. And it shows you just how thin the margins are. And if you get into the arena, the Knicks have a realistic shot at a championship. And I think that is the primary impetus behind this move, to bring in Malcolm Brogdon and say, hey, we don't want to trade Tyler Kolek. We don't want to trade Malcolm Brogdon. Malcolm Brogdon might end up playing an extremely small role on this team. He might not be in the everyday rotation when it's all said and done. But if this is a guy that flips one playoff game for us, even in the way campaign flipped game one against the Detroit Pistons, that could be the difference between winning and losing a series. That could be the difference between winning and losing a championship. So the next step in that conversation is Malcolm Brogdon still that same player? Is he still capable of all that? I think for a number of reasons he is. This is another step forward in the Knicks continuing to lean into shooting and into offense, at least in terms of their roster construction, right? That is something that Tom Thibodeau did not really want to do in terms of the lineups he put out, at least consistently, right? There were certainly bench units where he's built them around Cat, and he built them around offense, and he built them around shooting. But Tom Thibodeau consistently last year was trying to play as big and as defensively oriented as he possibly could, while still maintaining some level of balance, right? Which was his reticence, I think, to start Mitchell Robinson initially. But we spent this whole offseason talking about, right? You trade for Karl-Anthony Towns, you build your team around Jalen Brunson and Cat, two, in my money, of the top 10 or 12 best offensive players in the NBA, and both guys who are going to be liabilities defensively. You are committing to a philosophy where your pathway to a title is being an all-time great offense and a defense that can hold their own. And every move the Knicks have made this offseason has been doubling down on that, right? Jordan Clarkson, more shooting, more playmaking. Gershon Yabusele, a transition threat, an above-the-break threat, a pump-and-go threat. Now in Landry Shamet, right? You bring in, instead of bringing in Ben Simmons and maybe that was Ben Simmons' decision. Maybe that wasn't the Knicks' decision, but either way, instead of bringing Ben Simmons as just an all-defense guy, you bring in Shamet as another high-level shooter. You potentially bring Garrison Matthews as another elite shooter. You bring in Malcolm Brogdon, who brings more than just that to the table, right? Throughout his career, he is profiled as an elite shooter from distance, though not on high volume. Career 39% from three. But what he also brings to the table is just one of the best driving guards, one of the best finishing guards in recent NBA history, right? We are talking, or okay, maybe that is overstating it, but in terms of someone who was not a star player, I'll say amongst role players, right? One of the best driving and finishing guards over the last 10 years in the NBA. And you look at his numbers from last year, right? 13, 4, and 4, mostly for the Washington Wizards, on 43% from the field, 29% from three, 88% from the foul line, right? It was far and away the least efficient year of his career. In fact, it was the first year of his career by points per shot attempt, which is what Clean the Glass uses, my preferred metric for overall shooting efficiency, right? He was 46th percentile in that statistic. He was 88th percentile just 3 years ago. If I'm remembering correctly, I don't have it up in front of me right now. He had never been lower than 58th percentile in his career. Yep, I just confirmed that. 58th percentile in his career in points per shot attempt. So last year, he was really inefficient. You look at that and you say, all right, has this guy taken a significant step back as a player? Or at least in terms of his athleticism, right? And at 32, he's going to turn 33 relatively early in the season. That's totally possible. And yet, you look at his stats at the rim, and I'm going to say that that same talent is still in there. 38% of his shots came at the rim last year. That was 93rd percentile. That is a ridiculous percentage of his shots at the rim. And keep in mind the context of that, right? That was playing with Bilal Coulibaly, Bub Carrington, Alex Sarr, guys who were not exactly floor spacers, right? Washington was one of the worst space teams in the NBA. And yet, despite that, Malcolm Brogdon was able to consistently get to the rim and create shots at the rim. And you could say, all right, that's great, but he probably didn't shoot very well when he got there, right? Because he was going up against it, just multiple trees, bigs just clogging up the lane. It probably didn't look all that good. You'd be wrong. He shot 65% at the rim, which was a career high in his age 32 season. That's incredibly exciting. That tells me, again, unless there was a significant drop off this past summer, and I would assume the Knicks have intel that wasn't the case, that is a really good number. That was above average in terms of shot efficiency in the NBA, despite the fact that he had crazy volume. He was 62 percentile in finishing, despite above 90th percentile volume, right? That is a great combination. And on top of that, he was 94th percentile on shooting fouls drawn rate. So basically, like, that is the percentage of your shots that end in a shooting foul. And he was really good at that. I think the number was 14%. That is really, really encouraging to the idea that he is still there athletically. And the 3-point shooting was down. I would assume the degree of difficulty on his threes were way up. First of all, he shot them at a career low volume, right? He just 21% of his shots were from three. That was 5th percentile amongst guards in the NBA. He's never in his career. He's always been an efficient 3-point shooter. He's never been a high volume 3-point shooter, right? Not someone super comfortable generating them on his own, like Jordan Clarkson can at times. Like, has generally been more reliant on playing with guards that could create catch and shoot threes for him. And on the Knicks, he will have that, right? Jalen Brunson, if they get to play together, will create catch and shoot threes for him. Jordan Clarkson, if those two play together as a bench unit, will be able to create catch and shoot threes for him. But when he does play with high quality teammates and he gets good looks, he is, as indicated by that ridiculous 39% career number, he's been an excellent 3-point shooter. And last season, just to give you some context on why that shooting percentage was so low, right? 29% from three last season. He got only 1.5 catch and shoot threes per game last year. The year before that, he was taking 3 per game. So he was not really taking the types of threes he was comfortable with, shot them at low volume, shot them at low efficiency. I would expect if he does ultimately make the Knicks roster, it all looks a lot better this year. The other element that Malcolm Brogdon brings to the table that I think the Knicks really need still is playmaking. And playmaking that I think you can more viably play next to Jalen Brunson than Jordan Clarkson.
The NFL season is finally here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet.
Tom Dundon has a formal agreement in place to become the new owner of the Portland Trail Blazers.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast.
We're talking about the formal agreement finally in place. The Blazers have reached a formal agreement with Tom Dundon to sell the team to Dundon and his ownership group. The Allen estate announced it last Friday. We will get into unpacking all of that. There is a new notable name that is part of the ownership group. There is a line that people will parse in the press release announcing the formal agreement. Plus, I want to close the show talking about kind of some things that I have discussed in recent episodes on this here podcast and how they shift or how maybe to interpret them in light of new ownership. Some things that I did not maybe unpack in previous shows. We will unpack them there. First, let's just get into the announcement. This came across my desk, my digital desk, on September 12th. Here is the full press release from the Allen estate. Let me read it to you. The estate of Paul G. Allen today announced it has entered a formal sale agreement with Tom Dundon for the Portland Trail Blazers NBA franchise. Dundon, owner and CEO of the NHL's Carolina Hurricanes, will be joined by Mark Czar, co-president of Blue Owl Capital, Sheil Tile, the Portland-based founder and CEO of Collective Global, and the Churn family, the family office of the co-founders of Panda Express and Panda Restaurant Group as owners, who confirmed their intention to keep the team in Portland. Terms of the deal were not disclosed. The transaction is subject to the approval by the Board of Governors. So we kind of knew this, right? It was first reported by The Athletic in late August that the sale price was going to be about $4.25 billion. And the Oregon, you might have had that first. But what the Athletic had first was not the dollar figure, was that there was a purchase agreement that was going to be signed in September with a closing date likely coming. The aim for the closing date was March 31st, 2026. That's what we knew, right? We knew that they were trying to get a formal agreement, names on paper, ink, make it official, make it formal, that this was actually going to happen. And with the closing date, The Athletic has since reported, that's Jason Quick of The Athletic, has since reported that they hope to move up the closing date before March 31st. I bet they do. I bet as soon as you agree to buy this thing, you want to have it be yours as quickly as possible. But it's a large thing you're purchasing, and the Board of Governors have to approve you, and it is always a process that people thought was going to take, as reported here on Locked On Blazers, 9 to 12 months. Even with the agreement now in September, we're talking another 6 maybe before we get to the like formal full ownership. Although it could happen a little bit faster. But the most notable thing is not just that it's formal agreement, yay, huzzah. It is this last name, the Churn Family Trust. That is Andrew and Peggy Churn. They are the co-founders of Panda Express, once known as Panda Inn in beautiful Pasadena, California, and now this, the massive global fast casual Amero Chinese chain. This is not notable because, I'm like excited about orange chicken and beef and broccoli, or like, or a double fried rice combo. But like, this is notable because these seem to be the wealthiest people involved in the ownership group. There has been some public reporting that, Tom Dundon said in court, I have my net worth is $2 billion. Well, that's not enough to buy a basketball team. But I said here that it's like the most likely story is that's just like that's not how much money he actually has. He has more money that he can kind of tuck away than he's going to say in court, because that's how sort of the world works, and that he has more money than he has shown. But that he wasn't like crazy bonkers. Of course, this dude could buy an NBA team rich. In fact, I've had a couple people on from who work in the work in the, in the Raleigh Durham Triangle area and cover the Hurricanes, right? Some media folks from Hurricane Country, and like their initial response when asked him right here on the show is like, yeah, we didn't maybe know that he had NBA valuation money. It's like, he's rich. This is like a hundreds and some millionaire type of person, like this is the uber wealthy, but there's levels to this. And maybe the perception was that Dundon didn't have that kind of money. It became clear to me that the further the Blazers or I should say the Allen estates, because the Blazers will exist under Dundon as well, but the further like the sort of Allen estate got down this path, it was obvious that Dundon had more money than maybe that was like he didn't have like demonstrable wealth in a way that like us and the general public can see, but like clearly he's rich enough that they got far enough down the line with this negotiation of sale that it's like, yeah, I'm sure he has been able to present it to the folks that need to know about it. But the Churn family, the Churn estate, the Churn Family Trust, that's another step up in wealth. The sort of like public reporting on their wealth is always these sites that do it is always a little dubious, but Forbes has the Churn family at somewhere at around $7.5 billion. I've seen reporting that the trust has a portfolio of about $4 billion. But if they're in the $7 billion range, yeah, that's the richest, or at least the most like publicly wealthy folks who are involved in the ownership group. And I think that's meaningful because now it's like, yeah, they got the money. No worries. But the question is kind of like, I don't think we'll know this. We'll know this more as it operates than we will before the like sale is, before like Tom Dundon is in charge of the basketball team. But he has to pay 15% to be the controlling owner, somewhere between 15 and 21%. I think it had been previously reported that it was 21, but I believe it's 15% to be the outright owner. Like, so, $700 million, like that's the money he would have to put up to be the guy in charge. The way that like these things are too expensive, he's going to have to, if you want to be the person who makes decisions with other people's hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, you're going to have to pay for it. That's how it works. But I feel like this is, now you have a group that seems to be, certainly like demonstrably wealthy enough. I would say that my concern with Dundon wasn't that he wasn't rich. It was that he didn't have the demonstrable, obvious, like basketball rich basketball team owning rich type of wealth. This group seems to have that. They also have some folks with Oregon ties. As I mentioned, the press release, Shield Tile has relocated here. His wife works in the healthcare system in the Portland area, or like runs the hospital. Works in the healthcare system. Is like a powerful CEO in the locally. And the Chern family, which is Andrew and Peggy Chern. Peggy graduated from Oregon State in 1970. She had an applied mathematics degree. Now, like their empire, like Panda is still based in California. It started in Pasadena, it's northeast Los Angeles. But like certainly they have like vague ties to the region, right? If you're looking for that.
Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's a 401k or properties or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. I linked all my accounts to Monarch and immediately spotted a few subscriptions I wasn't even using. Canceling those all can save you money every month. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNFL.
Ranking the Timberwolves' biggest roster holes. What do the Wolves still need?
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast.
For the ESPN article, biggest roster holes for all 30 NBA teams. It came out on Friday, and it was really like Kevin Pelton does a great job. This actually really feels just like they were like, hey, Kevin, tell us something that each team needs and give us 2 sentences on each. I mean, some of them, like, it's strange. Like the Warriors one just says official contracts. We know that they're still trying to figure out the Jonathan Kuminga stuff. So like, that's, I guess, just kind of funny. The Thunder just says their new arena, which they are getting, it just won't open until 2028. So they'll have the next 2 seasons or 3 seasons, I guess, at the old arena. So like not even real things. I don't know, but the Wolves one though, what he's got from Minnesota is wing depth, which like, yeah, that's true. But I think I would have a little bit of a different take on this. So what Kevin Pelton says is, I'll just read what he has about the Wolves. It says, having lost Nickeil Alexander-Walker, the Timberwolves are counting on their recent draft picks to step into larger roles. Terrence Shannon Jr. heads the list after contributing in the conference finals and dominating in the NBA Summer League ahead of 2024 lottery pick Rob Dillingham. Disruptive defender Jalen Clark is also an option. Hard to argue with the overall premise. Yes, the one rotation piece they're missing was wing depth in the shape of the form of Nickeil Alexander-Walker, right? Like the only guy that was in the rotation last year regularly that's gone is Nickeil. So it stands to reason that backfilling that role is the most important thing and the thing that this team needs the most. However, I would argue, I would really take this in a slightly different direction. Actually, let me kind of underline a little bit what Pelton's saying. And I don't know, he did it in a couple of sentences. He wrote like a short paragraph on every team. So it's not like this is a massive article. But to me, obviously the Nickeil role needs to be filled. But if you go a layer deeper, like who else is missing off the roster from last year? It's really just Josh Minott and Luka Garza in terms of guys who at any point last season played some sort of rotation role. Like those guys are gone. Not that Minott was consistently a member of the rotation, but there were stretches back in the fall last year, November-ish, plus or minus, that he was involved a little bit in the rotation, and now he's gone. So he was what, the 10th or 11th guy, I guess you'd say. So that next layer of guys on the roster doesn't even include wings. I mean, beyond Terrence Shannon Jr., Jalen Clark, and Rob Dillingham, who's a guard, I mean, you get into Joe Ingles, who I guess is technically a wing. He's really a small ball 4 at this point, a point forward 4 in very specific lineups if you need him. And, the Garza role is replaced by some combination of, I guess, nobody. Like they don't have any additional bigs that have backfilled that role. They haven't added anybody else to a standard contract. The two-way guys, Enrique Freeman, like he may get some opportunities. Rocco Zakarski, obviously, I don't think he will. I think he'll be in the G League. But those guys are on two-way deals. And the rookie Jean Beringer, I mean, I guess he's the answer, right? Like he technically is in the Garza role this year at this point, even though he's 19 and extremely raw, barely played basketball for the last few years, or I should say has only played basketball for the last few years. So I would worry a little bit more about that next layer of depth now that Minot's gone too, because at least you knew what he could give you. And now there's just what's next, like what's beyond that. But the bigger issue, I would argue, is the point guard spot. And this is maybe the obvious one. Like we talked about this forever. Like, hey, what do you do with Mike Conley? But not only that, the Nikhil thing, yes, he provided wing depth, but he was also the backup point guard. So we've talked about this plenty on the show, but I think from a national perspective, what's missing here is that it really is lead ball handler depth, because behind Mike Conley, who may or may not even be a starter at the start of the year, I think he will start the year as a starter for what it's worth. I know we've seen kind of multiple reports on either direction for that over the last few months, but I think he probably starts the year as a starter, and ideally Rob Dillingham takes the bull by the horns and ends up as the starting point guard. But behind Mike Conley, like Anthony Edwards is the only other guy really initiating offense. And last year they could at least have Nikhil do it 10 minutes a game, even if it wasn't his greatest skill set. He was capable of doing it. So not only was he wing depth, but he was also backup point guard depth, kind of by almost automatically by necessity. So that's not really Terrence Shannon Jr.'s game. It's certainly not Jalen Clark's game. And we saw the Wolves trying to get Shannon to do a bit more creating for others in the summer league in Vegas. So that I think goes along with the wing depth. The lack of wing depth would be the lack of lead ball handler depth. And I don't necessarily want to call it point guard depth, because Minnesota has clearly gone away from having a traditional backup point guard. They did not at any point last year, other than, Bones Highland was never sniffed rotation minutes, but he would have been the only other point guard on the roster. And he may be again this year too. They didn't even fill a two-way spot with a point guard. Tristan Newton's not a point guard, and the other two-way slots are bigs, Freeman and Zakarski. So gone are the days of Jordan McLaughlin and Monte Morris and other guys that could play point guard. Minnesota's not apparently worried about that with the way that Tim Connolly puts the roster together for Chris Finch to use. There's a couple of other things I really want to focus in on related to Timberwolves roster holes that I would put ahead of what ESPN did, ahead of just straight wing depth. I want to add a couple of qualifiers to it, a specific type of depth that, yes, involves the wing, but are really elements that are missing on the Wolves roster. And depending on how they fill out the roster and what this thing looks like 6 months from now, as we're talking about gearing up for the playoffs, this is a specific elements and qualities that you'd be looking for in this depth. And yes, it could include different wings, more wings, etc. But that's what I want to key in on next.